depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live recording of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. This is the weekly podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation. The podcast is called Transformation Ground Control, and this is the live production that you get to be a part of. So thank you for being here today. I'm excited for our topic today, which is called Top ERP Systems for 2024. Always a fun topic to talk about each year. And I'll introduce my guest here in just a moment, who is going to help us unpack this topic and talk about some of the trends and changes in the marketplace and just things to be aware of as it relates to different ERP software vendors as you plan for your digital transformation initiatives in 2023, 2024, and beyond. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And again, this podcast is called Transformation Ground Control. You can view past episodes of this show by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. That's where you can get the versions that you watch on YouTube or LinkedIn, or you can subscribe on that same website to the various podcast platforms that we distribute to. Couple of logistical things. First of all, we're going to take a lot of audience questions here today. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If you have comments about certain vendors in the marketplace, or if you have questions about certain software solutions in the marketplace, I'd love to hear your questions and feedback. I've got some questions to get us started, but really this is your session, and I'm hoping you guys can be an active part of this, since this is why we do it live, so we can get your questions and input as well. Speaking of chat too, if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from. Love to see where the global community is joining from each week. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from, we'd love to hear from you and see where you're joining from today. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, so we'll be keeping an eye on the chat here on all those platforms, and we'll be taking questions along the way. So joining me today to discuss this very exciting topic is Adam Cheatham, who's Managing Director at Third Stage Consulting. Adam, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody else from around the world. These are always fun. I love joining these conversations, so appreciate you bringing me in.
Absolutely. Love having you here. And we were just talking about right before we came on live here, late, by the way, because I was late today. So just to be clear to the audience here, the reason we're starting late is because of me, not because of Adam. So it's totally my fault. But we were talking right before we went live that we did this same session last year. It's been almost a year, but it feels like we just did it a couple months ago. We did the late 2022 version of this show where we talked about what trends to be aware of for 2023. So it's already been a year. It's time for us to revisit this topic again and see what's changed in the marketplace and see, what exciting developments we should be aware of as we start planning for ERP implementations in 2024. So I guess just to start, maybe Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself for those that haven't seen you on the show before. Tell us about you and your background.
Yeah. So I'm Managing Director at Third Stage Consulting Group, which generally means that I'm responsible for all of our delivery teams and making sure that they have all the tools that they need to produce the high quality that we pride ourselves on at Third Stage. I have a background in taking the digital transformation conversation from a business perspective, where the goal is for technology to serve as an enabler of technology. I like to think of, when we talk about achieving the third stage of digital transformation, two key phrases. One is self-sufficiency, and the other one is continuous improvement. If you are not obtaining both of those within your ERP, you've not gotten to the third stage, because you should be able to run your software by yourself without heavy dependency on maintaining code from a vendor or a system integrator, and you should be enabling your continuous improvement goals as a business so that you can continue to grow at the pace that you have sought to grow at. So that's really where my background comes from. I've been doing this type of thing for, it's 15 years now, it seems. It's been a long time, but I've always enjoyed working with you, Eric, and Third Stage in general. So this is a cool conversation.
Yeah, our time together goes way back. So we've seen together in this space. We've seen a lot of interesting stuff happen and develop in the marketplace. So it's been a fun ride for sure.
And today's conversation will be no different, right? This continues to evolve, especially with the many changing technologies out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and already the audience is very actively engaged. And I appreciate that, because I'm not a morning person, and it's morning here in the U.S. And I like that the audience is just keeping me they're just getting me going here with the comments and questions here already. But I want to thank all those of you that dropped in the chat where you're joining from. People joining all over the world, as I mentioned before: Denver, Colorado, Austin, Texas, Rochester, New York, Baltimore in the U.S., Sri Lanka, Pittsburgh, Paris, Oman, India, Milwaukee, Jeddah, Belgium, Hungary, all over the place. So UK. So thank you everyone for joining here today, and love having this global community. It's pretty cool thinking about all of us all over the world talking about this same stuff, all live here. So thank you for that. But just to maybe get started here, what's if we sort of back up a little bit and just sort of look back on this last year in 2023 and where we're headed in 2024, what are the biggest trends for ERP systems in 2023? Like, what are the biggest developments in the space that we should all be aware of?
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest thing is the continuing trend towards cloud and subscription-based software, right? It gets harder and harder every year to talk somebody into selling an on-premise system, and that's something that I think is only going to continue. It's a massive revenue driver for vendors in general. So I think that's something that it wouldn't be an only 2023 trend, but it is a continuing trend, I would say. We've also started to see vendors talk a lot more about AI, which I think is an important thing to touch base on, especially as it pertains to the way that we approach software evaluations, which is we don't recommend being the guinea pig.
Right.
And right now, AI is developing. It's a developing technology. It does a lot of great things. That's true. But ERP is something that, from a developing a new technology perspective, tends to be a lagging adopter, if you will. So if you think about the subscription trend, for example, that's just now really, I'd say over the last year or two, reached a critical mass in ERP. I think AI is going to do something very similar in that it's just going to continue to need to develop before it becomes something that you can trust. The way I like to think about it is if you're putting your business's lifeline up to chance because you want something new to work, if you've never seen it work, and I promise you, software vendors right now have never seen it really truly work the way you think it should, take it with a grain of salt. They're gonna spend some time developing it. That's important, but at the same time, realize where it's at. If it's on the future roadmap, that means it doesn't exist yet. So,
yeah. And when you go into vendor conferences this year, it's amazing how much the focus has really shifted to AI. I mean, they were already talking about it. They're talking about machine learning and AI and stuff like that pre-2023. But if you think about it, ChatGPT really just bust onto the scene late last year / early this year. In a very short amount of time, it's suddenly become the number one trend that the industry seems to be obsessed with, which is just AI and how are we going to build AI into our tool set and how are we going to fast track that. So it's been pretty interesting to watch.
How do you differentiate between things like predictive analytics and AI? Are they different?
Right.
Maybe. I like to think that maybe even things like MRP, that these things have been around for a long time. We've been using data to make decisions. The only difference is in AI, in my opinion, is you're asking it to be a little bit smarter. And as data becomes more mature in an organization, your system can be a little bit smarter. And that's really what you want to look for.
Yeah. Here's an interesting comment from the audience on LinkedIn. Venkat says AI can be a reality or fade as a myth. So
right.
You're curious to see where we go. I don't know. I'll be really curious to see how this unfolds because, in my time in this space, I don't know about you, Adam, but in my time, I don't recall a trend that has taken hold so quickly, even though AI is not new necessarily, but it just has reached this tipping point of
all of a sudden, obsession
or whatever. And it's really fascinating to watch. I'll be curious to see if it really does stick, which I think it will, but who knows?
Yeah. And it's we even have the comment here, a 90% correct algorithm is better than a 75% sales manager. And that's there's a lot baked into that comment. First of all, you got to get your algorithm 90% correct. That's not easy to do. And it's even harder to prove that it's 90% right. It takes time to figure it out. Same as if you have a 75% sales manager, it's gonna take you time to learn where that 25% wrong is, just as much as it's gonna take you time to learn where the 10% wrong is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point too, which is, in parallel with ERP vendors trying to figure out how are they going to bake AI more, more significantly into their offering. In the meantime, what can we be doing as organizations to get ready for AI? And I think there's, some things I think you alluded to. Maybe it's worth unpacking as it relates to data and that sort of thing. What can we be doing to get ready for AI? So when AI is mature and when it's relevant to us as an organization, we're ready for it.
Getting your data clean and comprehensive, right? If you want to think about AI as artificial intelligence, think about what data your brain gets as real intelligence, right? So it's taken in a lot of different sources of information, just the same way AI needs to take in a lot of different sources of information. And if you're missing a big piece of information as an individual, you can make bad decisions without it. AI is entirely dependent on data and pulling that information in. And if it's missing a hole, it's going to act like it's missing a hole. So that's the biggest part. Clean and comprehensive is the key. And it will take me a long time to get to the point where I don't feel like there always must be a human intervention point, right? You don't want AI running your business. I think somebody just hired an AI as a CEO or something like that.
I didn't hear this.
It did not go well.
I can't imagine that it did.
And then there was another restaurant that was in San Francisco. It was an AI restaurant. It's an AI smoothies restaurant. They were open for 2 weeks.
Right.
So, it's an early adoption type of technology that you got to watch out and know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and Gage on LinkedIn has an interesting comment here, a question, which is related to what you just said, which is it will be interesting to see whether AI is used as an enhancement tool to human operations or replacement, and what areas, industries, positions that will affect. So I think it's a great point that you're both making, which is what is AI going to mean to us as organizations, as a society too? But that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds and why organizations use AI. Are they trying to eliminate humans or make them better at their jobs, or some combination of both?
Yeah, and then you start thinking about the change management aspect of that, right? Like it's change management is hard enough when you talk about replacing somebody's spreadsheet.
Right.
You talk about replacing intelligence, and now where are you from a change management perspective, and how do you approach that? It gets a whole lot more intimate in the competition with individual jobs. And I do love this. If you're missing a hole, it's going to hallucinate data to fill it. I had never thought it never crossed my mind that artificial intelligence could hallucinate.
I mean, anything's possible with AI. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
They made movies about it,
Exactly. Back in the 80s, they were talking about this stuff.
Right, in the year 2000.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. Here's getting into the actually, before I go to that, this is a comment to fill in a gap or to complete the thought there with the AI CEO. Mika, the CEO, only had a rum and spirits producer. So that's interesting. Someone that produces rums and spirits has a CEO that's AI, but no longer. Apparently, Mika gets fired. Is that right? So am I understanding this right? They hired AI and then did they fire the CEO?
I don't know exactly what happened, but I did read that it was not exactly as planned. But I guess if it's a rum producer, maybe the purpose was misdirected. And well, if we have AI run our company, there's more time for the rum.
Right, exactly. Or they were drinking rum when they came up with the idea of having an AI CEO.
Somebody was going to be the first.
Yeah. Well, so for everyone that's worried about AI taking human jobs, we've got a case study here of AI losing their job to a human. So there's good news. There's a silver lining in all this. Shifting gears a bit and getting into some specific vendor-ish type questions, which I think is what everyone really wants to hear. That's where all the juicy controversy always starts. And leave it to Kyler, our co-host on Transformation Ground Control to really stir the pot here. This is her question here on, although I don't think she means it this way. Her question is, what are your thoughts on SAP's move to mid-market with the announcement of Grow? And I've got a follow-up question on another vendor related to this in a moment to build on this. But what are your thoughts about SAP sort of going down market, announcing this Grow initiative to try and further penetrate that market?
Honestly, I think it's about time. I've been waiting for them to do this for about 5 years with the HANA platform. I thought it would end up on a HANA platform, to be entirely honest, but it's slightly different. But I think that it was time for SAP to come back into that. I don't know how many folks have evaluated the Business One platform and the other pre-existing SAP smaller market products, but they're starting to look old, and they're starting to really become antiquated, right? The investments just weren't there, so it's time for that to happen. I've heard some great things from them about it, and I'm interested in seeing how it turns out. I think it's also worth going back to the "don't be the guinea pig" conversation. They're saying some amazing things about these platforms, like they can have a core business processes up in as quickly as 4 weeks, and a full ERP as quickly as 13. That's incredible. The only folks that I've seen do that effectively to date are NetSuite with their Suite Success methodology, and they can do it. So I believe that SAP can do it as well. I just haven't seen it yet. So the Grow and the Rise platforms, I think it was time for that to happen. I'm excited to see how that disrupts the industry, because I think that it will. But it's at the same time, it's not yet proven. And I'm looking forward to seeing it when it happens.
Yeah, it will be curious to see too if they can, if SAP can figure out how to sort of streamline their footprint, if you will, or streamline the products, streamline the implementations of these products so that it's more relevant and lighter, for the mid-market, not so heavy, compared to like a Fortune 500 company, because they're going to need that obviously to be successful in that space. You mentioned NetSuite too, which I was actually going to bring this up too. I feel like it's kind of interesting to see NetSuite and SAP sort of converging in on the mid-market. SAP's coming downstream. NetSuite's been moving upstream ever since Oracle acquired them. I feel like they've been sort of trying to go upstream into the upper mid-market. And it'd be curious to see if SAP and NetSuite start to compete more as a result. But what are your thoughts on NetSuite sort of not abandoning their base? But I mean, obviously they still have a really solid base with the smaller businesses that are just converting from, say, a QuickBooks, and this is sort of like the first ERP system, but now they're kind of going after these bigger, more complex organizations. What are your thoughts about NetSuite going upstream?
Yeah, I think they're growing more into that. One of the you asked about trends. One of the things that I think has been a bigger trend this year is that we hadn't, prior to 2023, seen Oracle Fusion and Oracle NetSuite compete on the same deals very often. Frankly, it was kind of more of when we talked to our connections at Oracle, they would pick one, and then they would say, "This is what we're going to go for," because I think they felt like maybe they were cannibalizing a little bit. I think now the tactic is different. They more often want to put both forward. So I think there's more of a trying to flood the decision-making process with an Oracle product. Maybe because of a response to this SAP platform, maybe not. But that's been a change. I think that NetSuite can really scale up. It struggles too if it's anything really super complex. But they're built on the made for NetSuite platforms that are they feel best of breed, but they are in the same code base. So you have there's an advantage in that. So I'd say that as they grow into those spaces and target them, there are spaces where NetSuite fits in that larger market. But I will say that it's still is more to their core, the small medium businesses that are going to end up in more of a NetSuite platform.
Yeah, and you use a key word there that I wanted to touch on, which is platform. I think a lot of vendors, including NetSuite, Salesforce with the Force platform, and other vendors too, are starting to get into this more of the platform mentality of, rather than just building a single app that accomplishes needs of multiple industries and functions, they're doing that, but then also building an opportunity for third parties to develop apps within that native
Oh yeah.
solution, which is fascinating to see NetSuite do a lot of that too.
Well, they're trying to corner the rest of the market, right? So the conversation on best of breed and composable ERP, which is kind of the new term for best of breed, people must have gotten tired of it.
Right.
We'll put it in the same bucket as best practice, right? It's just kind of people were tired of hearing it, but when you think about it that way, providers are starting to try to now that they've, I think, migrated the core of their ERP, start to build around that so that they can bring more things in house. Epicor's doing it. They over this last year they bought a transportation management system that they'll bring in house, and they're bringing in a lot of acquisitions from a product perspective to integrate them with the Epicor platform. So I think that we'll see that expand, and the market will grow back towards this monolithic conversation. It's just getting there to monolithic in pieces, I guess, where you can get all of the same pieces, get all of the different pieces rather from the same provider. I think that's really where this is headed on the whole, because as the shift moves away from we got to get into the cloud, as more folks have gotten to that point, I think just about everybody has. It'll now become, now how do we expand our reach within the cloud to keep more of our customers within just our platform, and that best of breed composable ERP trend is going to only really continue to grow.
Yeah. And one thing it's worth noting here that we've been talking about some of the vendors that we ranked in our top 10 ranking for 2024. Every year we put out an independent ranking of top systems in the market across industries, across functions and geographies, which is very difficult to do. It's very broad, but it can be a good starting point. And if you haven't seen that yet, I'm going to share, if it lets me, in the top left corner of the screen there, you can see there's a QR code you can scan to see our top 10 list there. And I'd love to hear, while we're talking here today, if you look at that list, kind of scan through that list and have questions about it, we'd love to take some of those questions here as we're talking here today. So I'll leave that up here for a moment to let you scan that so you can view our top 10 list. But another question that came up here, I'm going to come back to here. Just lost it. This is less of a vendor specific question and more of a general trend sort of a question. It was about the cloud, and here it is. Okay, this is from LinkedIn. I apologize. I don't see who the person is. I don't see the name on this LinkedIn account, but I do see it coming from LinkedIn. And that is, what do you think about the cloud hype? Is there real added value for customers, or is it just ERP vendors making more money on the same customer base? Stirring up the controversy. I like it.
Let's just go with a yes. I think that there are scenarios where we have seen clients that have been severely disadvantaged by the cloud platform approach, where if you don't go live and go live on budget and on time, you're in a real tough spot, because it's really, really hard to talk vendors into giving that money back. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen them do it. So we've had clients that have said, I've been trying to implement this software for 3 years, and we are still not live, and we've been paying for licenses since day one, and we'd love to get some of that money back. And vendor says, no way. Actually, you got 2 more years, so make sure you keep making those payments on time. So there is a bit of a revenue generation engine behind that's changed the dynamic of the space. Whereas in the past, with the on-premise and the perpetual licensing platforms, it was much easier to say, well, we'll buy the licenses when we go live. That doesn't happen anymore. So I'd say that there is a challenge in that if you find yourself in the wrong spot. But I think that overall, the subscription base and the multi-tenant platforms that are out there from a cloud perspective are really important to the growth of businesses in today's day and age. If you want to be nimble and you want to be responsive to the market, you got to be on the internet, and there's just no other way around it. And it allows for such rapid scalability. You don't have to take new servers to the other side of the world to integrate your platforms and then have batch jobs. It's all real time, and that was a whole lot harder to do in the past, and it was really starting to feel like a cloud-based anyway. Once you started doing it really well, because then it's all just servers connected to the internet, which is essentially what it is. The only difference is the servers are on the vendor's server platforms and all that stuff rather than yours. So I'd say that the benefits are there, especially as it pertains to being responsive. So I would encourage the cloud platforms for sure. And at the end of the day, it also forces the conversation on customization into a place where it belongs, I think. It helps customers break habits in customization rather than reinforces them, which is the old on-premise. You write the code, you write it to say anything. Today, that's harder to do because of the multi-tenant scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, longer term, if we fast forward, say 3 to 5 years from now, I think a lot of this becomes somewhat of a moot point. But I think right now the cloud space, the cloud ERP space, largely is largely in this transitionary stage. If you set aside, say, a NetSuite, Workday, Salesforce, those are three big ERP enterprise tech vendors that are built in the cloud. They're built as SaaS solutions. So set those aside for a moment because this comment
Yeah.
doesn't apply to them. But aside from NetSuite, Salesforce, Workday, you look at the rest of the market in the ERP space, most of them are migrating from their on-prem solutions, which had been around for decades with all this R&D and all this advanced functionality and stuff that was built for those core solutions. Now they're trying to rewrite all that stuff and recreate that and replicate that functionality in the cloud, which will eventually get there, but we're still kind of working through the growing pains of that transition. So to answer the question about, is this better for the vendors? I'd say in the short term and long term, it is really good for the vendors. I mean, the vendors obviously are chomping at the bit to get more cloud subscription revenue. Investors love it. It increases the multiples of their valuations and they make more money when they sell more cloud software. In the short term, it may not be as much value as it will be in, say, 3 or 5 or 7 years from now, because those solutions will mature and they'll deliver more value over time. But right now it's difficult because a lot of these vendors don't quite have the capabilities in the cloud that they used to have in on-prem. Now having said that, there are some new capabilities they're introducing and that can only be enabled by the cloud or further enabled by the cloud, like AI and some of the analytics and things like that. Internet of Things, you think about all these things that are enabled by cloud, there is going to be more value over time. But in the short term, organizations have to be realistic that there are some bumpy growing pains in that transition.
Yeah, and I'd say that coming back to the AI conversation, you won't be able to leverage that effectively without a cloud SaaS-based platform, because when you really get into it and all that data becomes all shared, whether it's partitioned well or not, you start to gain a lot more access, right? That's really when AI gets to the point where it can not only leverage your data, but the data that's out there as well on in other systems. I think that's a really powerful thing to be able to say that predictive analytics and those types of things can not only draw in your information, but what's happening on the broader market because of the size of the platform. So there's a lot in that has a lot of value that I think is going to just continue to expand.
Right.
I do want to poke a little bit on the Workday and the Salesforce conversation, where we think of those as ERP packages. I don't like thinking of those as ERP packages, to be fair. Salesforce is a CRM, right? You can combine it with similar platforms like Financial Force, and you can pull together an ERP environment. I think that's a different thing than an ERP system.
Yeah.
Workday is also has gotten to the point where I think that they are more viable as an ERP. They started as an HCM, but they are not in anything other than professional services and more people-oriented products. They can serve as an ERP in those cases, but if you're a manufacturing company or something like that, heavy distribution, Workday is going to feel a whole lot less like an ERP system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and it's worth noting because I tend to sort of blur the lines between ERP and non-ERP solutions, and
or on time, and
right, right, exactly. Yeah, things like starting a live podcast interview at the top of the hour versus 5 minutes after. I mean, gray
But
areas like that. But it is worth noting because Salesforce has a platform, right? It's not an ERP system per se, but it does give you a platform that you could deploy technologies that give you the ERP-ish sort of experience. But it really is a platform / best of breed where you're tying together multiple applications to create the ERP functionality you're looking for,
yeah.
which could be a good fit, but it's not an ERP system. You're right. It's absolutely, multiple systems. And I think the vendors will probably start to continue to blur those lines a bit between ERP and best of breed and platform versus application and things of that nature. Here's another vendor specific question from Kyler on LinkedIn. Kyler points to our top 10 ERP ranking, which again, you can scan with the QR code top left side of your screen if you want to view our top 10 list and comment on it. But Kyler's comment here is Epicor is new on our top ERP systems of 2024 and in the top 5. Why the rise of this system in the last year? And what are your thoughts on Epicor? First of all, do you think it belongs in the top 5? And we all have individual opinions, right? That may or may not align with the top 10 list exactly is how we put it out. But, we've got differing opinions, which is what makes it interesting. And you end up with sort of an average that gets you to the top 10 list, but we each have individually differing opinions. So what are your thoughts on Epicor? Does it belong in the top 5?
Yeah, and I'm pulling up the list itself so I can refer to it more directly also as we're talking here. But I would say yes, it does belong in the top 5. I've seen Epicor do some great things, and in the areas where they have struggled in the past, they've actually fixed those things and taken that quite seriously. So one of the challenges that I had in the past, for example, was the conversation between you buy Epicor Kinetic and then you go through an implementation where you say, well, that screen's going to have to be in Classic. What did you just say to me? Because am I using 2 ERPs right now or something? And that's a challenge. That was really hard to really walk the clients through and say, look, this is coming, especially when we talk about if it's on the roadmap, it doesn't exist yet. But they've plugged most, if not all of those holes now, and they've become a more comprehensive single interface. I think that by itself is something that not a lot of providers are able to accomplish on the whole. And then I think that they are also in the way that they're growing their footprint in ERP as it pertains to pulling in more of those edge systems in the environment and making them integrated with the Kinetic platform. As definitely belongs in the top 5. There are others in the top 5 that I may argue against, but I think Epicor does belong in there.
Yeah. I think Epicor too, one thing, if you look beyond the products that Epicor provides, I think one thing that they have going for them is just internally organizationally at Epicor, and also within their ecosystem, how they're handling both of those dimensions of ERP vendor evaluation. So when I talk about internal organization, they have a really strong leadership team. They've pulled a lot of players from the industry that have worked at other big vendors. They're now all at Epicor. So I feel like they've gotten a bit of talent at the top that they didn't have before. And they have some stability as a company. They've gone through a lot of transitions and PE handoffs and things like that, just buying and selling the company. It just sort of got gutted over time. And I think the company suffered as a result. And then also the ecosystem, they were at odds with a lot of their VARs for a long time. They didn't really have a good VAR implementation partner sort of network. And I think they're working really hard on building that back out again, which I think both those things work, are intangibles that are worth noting when you consider what ERP vendor you want to work with.
Yep. I think it's also worth always, when you mention Epicor, you can't get away from mentioning Infor. I'd say that if you're going to talk about Oracle versus SAP, the next step down, kind of like the before the main event, is always Infor versus Epicor. I think that's really the quintessential matchup, and Epicor matches up with them quite well. I'd say that when we go through the process of evaluating them head to head, they both compete quite strongly against each other, and Infor's move towards a more appropriate branding of the cloud suite with them, M3 on the cloud suite, Sightline on the cloud suite, LN on the cloud suite, as opposed to trying to call some of it cloud suite, some of it not, has really been something that they benefited from, and Koch Industries is really their acquisition of M4 has really stabilized as well, and we're seeing that come together too. So I think those two are neck and neck on the whole, and really a good thing to watch as we really start to see the 2024 come together, is what happens for both of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And just building on your comment there about Infor, this is from Venkat on LinkedIn. He says, I'm a licensed partner for Infor, and cloud proves to be a winning point for Infor implementations. Nevertheless, the startup and onboarding are pretty cringy, and any customization can be made more easy, or could be made more easy. So that's great feedback. And always, I think a lot of vendors, that same comment could be applied to a lot of software vendors as far as the startup and onboarding needing a bit of work, and getting outside the realm of just handing off a bunch of technology to an organization and hoping that they figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious in your mind, when we talk about the big guys, the S4 HANA versus the Fusion platform, what you're seeing in the marketplace as far as how those two are competing against each other. I mean, we've over the years seen some real fireworks between those two companies from somebody that's in it as a thought leader every day. How do you see that battle going down from the 2023 transitioning into 2024?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I feel like actually, in the past, SAP versus Oracle has been, that's a common evaluation we would see fairly commonly. You and I going back, 10 years. I feel like 10 years ago, you'd see a lot of SAP versus Oracle evaluations. Clients would hire us to come in and figure out which is the best. I feel like we're not seeing that as much, but what we are seeing is more of a validation of whether or not S/4HANA could work for an existing SAP customer, or that Oracle Fusion could work for an existing Oracle legacy product customer. So to answer your question, I feel like S/4HANA is actually doing a lot better as far as migrating their legacy customers to the cloud. Although, there's a huge percentage, an overwhelming majority have not yet started their migration to S/4HANA. So good news, bad news, I suppose. That's good news. It's a lot of opportunity for SAP. But of that 35 or 37% of the SAP customer base that has started a transition to S/4HANA, there just seems to be a lot more movement there. We don't seem to be seeing as much movement in Oracle, though. We don't see as many Oracle Fusion implementations as we do S/4HANA. And I don't know why that is. It could be just, a sample bias with our client base. I'm not sure, but what are you seeing? I mean, you're actually closer to the projects than I am as far as, you manage directors.
I think that a lot more of our engagements with SAP and Oracle on the HANA and the Fusion platforms has been more oriented towards failures, to be fair and honest. SAP implementations are really, really hard, and we usually get brought into them because something is hard and kind of carrying across the finish line. I'd say that I've seen more regularly the Fusion projects become abandonment projects more than the SAPs, where SAP's functionality that doesn't quite fit still can cross that last mile, where I've seen a whole lot more where the Fusion platform doesn't fit, it's not going too soon. And that's I think the bigger worry for me on the Oracle side is that there's not a light at the end of the tunnel, where with the SAP platform, they've had a whole lot more time to really get good at it. I guess they've had about the same amount of time, but they've spent more time getting good at it, maybe is a better way of putting it. So we see more S/4HANA on that than the Fusion. But I'd say I would expect the Fusion to start coming up a bit more, because it is something that they've got a platform that they've done a great job of building. It's just needs more building, right? So
yeah, you can bring up a couple of really good points there that I hadn't thought of. One is that that the troubled S/4HANA implementations, we're getting hired by a lot of them to help fix the problems they're having, and so you look at that and say, well, is that a good sign for SAP that a lot of their customers are hiring us to come fix them? I don't know, or I don't think so. I don't think that's a good sign. But what you bring up a good point that S/4HANA does have gaps. I mean, there's some deficiencies there that I know the SAP community hates when I say this, but I'll say it anyway. There are gaps in S/4HANA. There's things it can't do, especially when you get to some of that edge functionality around demand forecasting or PLM or whatever the case may be. You just have these gaps of things that ECC and R3 could have done really well and seamlessly. Now S4HANA doesn't do it quite as well because they just haven't matured enough. Oracle Fusion, on the other hand, Oracle Fusion, I feel like has been around. I mean, Fusion was developed. I mean, it was like 12 or 15 years ago. It was a long time ago they started working on Fusion. So much, I mean, so long ago that it became kind of a joke. Like, are they ever going to finish Fusion? And now it's almost like the joke. Maybe Oracle's the one laughing now because of Fusion is further along in some ways than S4HANA. And maybe that's why we're not seeing as many Oracle implementations, because they're not as many troubled implementations. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear from the audience what your hypothesis would be on why we might see more S4HANA implementations versus Oracle.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I do expect that to develop quite a bit more over the next few years, especially as when we get closer to that SAP deadline. People are going to start freaking out a little bit more. I actually talked to a guy in Brazil recently that was talking about changing to SAP, and I want to make that 2025 deadline, and I asked him, "Have you started yet?" Said no. It's like, you might think about that because 18 months is aggressive for an S4HANA platform implementation, and if you miss, and it's a big miss, then you got probably another 18 on top of that, and now all of a sudden we're 3 years in and you missed that deadline. So it's definitely hard. I would say that the biggest advantage I see on SAP side is that we see more organizations that we're an SAP shop. SAP comes with a culture, and that is our culture. And so we are going SAP the whole way because of this. On the flip side, that the Oracle, I think that they do have a whole lot more of the depth where they've got it. So the Oracle side of it is, I would say, easier to implement. But easier is a relative term. Keep in mind.
Yes, you didn't say easy; you said easier.
Yes, comparatively, right? So I think that there's an advantage in that. So we'll see how that plays out over the next year. I think it's really going to start getting to the point where larger organizations are thinking more cloud-based, and we'll see a bit more of that, which I think is actually worth bringing up our number one here, Microsoft Dynamics Finance and Operations, because I'd say that they will continue to really occupy a really great space, because not only can they compete with the SAPs, the S4HANA, and the Oracle Fusion platforms, but they can also compete better down market. And so if you're not $500 million or larger, you don't belong in Fusion or HANA. You just don't. It's too expensive and too hard to do. And if you do bomb it, you've got fewer resources to recover.
Yeah.
But Dynamics, we've seen scale way down. And then I think Microsoft's bigger challenge is there is a gap, a big gap between Business Central and Dynamics. And I'm curious on your side, as we talk about Microsoft, do you see them closing that gap, or do you see them continuing to take pretty significant different strategies in their market approach for those two?
That's a great question. I don't know how they close the gap, because F&O, or the finance and operations version of Dynamics 365, is so robust. It's built for a lot of different industries and functions, and they've even got, we were talking about platforms earlier. They've got somewhat of a platform strategy where third-party partners can take the core F&O D365 product and tailor it for a certain industry or a certain function. Like, for example, there's Tyler Technologies has taken Dynamics 365 and tailored it for, or they've taken Microsoft Dynamics. I don't know if it's D365 or not, so take this with a grain of salt. I may have my details slightly wrong, but in general, Tyler Technologies has taken Microsoft products and applied it to government. And I can give you a million other examples of third parties that have done that. So on one hand, they've built this very robust tool, this partner ecosystem that can tailor the F&O product for all these different industries. But to your point, if you're too big for Business Central, and Business Central is Microsoft's answer to NetSuite, really. I mean, it's meant to be a kind of a smaller ERP system. There is a big jump going from BC to D365 F&O, and there is a gap there. If you're sort of in the lower mid market, it could be tricky, because, and I don't know how they fill it, to be honest.
Maybe they don't.
Maybe that's okay.
We'll see. I think that they did a better job of the lower market in the past with AX, but I think that they did a a poorer job with the larger market in AX. Those platforms. So we'll have to see where that goes. But I do really like the Microsoft platforms. I do like that they are number one from an F&O perspective. I think that the Business Central side of it is something that is challenging in that we see a lot of folks try to implement that themselves and without a system integrator, which it can be done, but you still have to have a PMO. And that's really the big piece of it. And this applies to all ERP implementations, right? You don't want your system integrator or your vendor to be your PMO. You want to have a separate one. And when you don't hire a system integrator and you try to do it yourself and you don't have one, it's hard to see that you need one. So if you need help with that, I can certainly give me a holler, because we do a lot of it.
Yeah. That's a big part of what we do is software evaluations and just objectively and independently trying to figure out what the best answer is for clients. Here's a question that I have to ask because I know it's going to be a trigger for you. So it's going to be an awesome question here. It's from no one other than Kyle.
Yes,
yep, exactly. On LinkedIn. What about the movement to low-code, no-code solutions and the popularity of open source systems like Odoo? And I know you have some strong opinions about open source and Odoo. What are your thoughts on that movement in the ERP space?
I don't believe the business belongs in the code. Excuse me. So that's a personal thing, and I work really hard as an independent and agnostic advisor to make sure that doesn't influence our recommendations, because we do recommend Odoo every now and again, just as often as anybody else. And I think that it does provide the teams that have, excuse me, the maturity of their IT office a great opportunity. It feels like a smaller software package for smaller companies, so I would be aware of that. Somebody came to me recently though with a really interesting conversation, which was Odoo is a core base for a composable ERP approach. What if we get our manufacturing from someone else? Sorry, I got like a frog in my throat or something, and I'm out of coffee, so I will bear with it. But as a composable ERP approach, so we could run our finances with Odoo, but manufacturing out of something else. That was a really interesting idea for me, because they're literally talking about buying two different ERPs, but one for back of the house ops and one for shop floor ops. And I think that's a great idea. It's of course not that I know of tried and tested by any means, but it's an interesting thought process that really might expand the footprint of Odoo into a lot of hearts and minds, and that it gives an opportunity where a company can control their own integrated environment from an interoperability platform. That's an interesting take on that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And comment from LinkedIn. Kyler on LinkedIn says he's so triggered that he lost his voice, and that appears to be what
I'm speechless at the predictability that question was going to come up.
You knew I was going to ask you about Odoo, and I
yeah.
So just to give you a little background sneak peek into how the sausage is made, I always, whenever I have a guest on the show, including even Adam, who's been on here a million times, he knows me really well, I still send the questions in advance and say, these are the things I'm going to want to ask you. I intentionally did not put Odoo on there because I knew I was going to ask, it was going to be like a sneak attack, and I was just going to pop it on you and see how you responded. And there we go. I didn't have to do it.
By the way, but
Kyler did my dirty work for me,
though. I do. There is one that we didn't touch on our list, which I think is important to touch on. Is IFS. They are an incredibly complex platform, and I think they're actually, in my opinion, underrated on this list. That they're really, really a very good platform, and they handle complexity very, very well. If you're talking about SAP S/4HANA and you want to kick the tires on a possible competitor, think about IFS. We have seen them really do well against SAP, especially in complex manufacturing environments. So I think that's a good thing to think about. And really, if you're thinking in those in heavily complex manufacturing, SAP, IFS, and Infor-LN, we really see those three go head to head fairly regularly from that perspective. So you can't ignore them there. and then smaller businesses that have a breadth of complexity as well do really well with IFS too, where they scale quite nicely.
Yeah.
So they are complex, regardless of the size of your business. They're going to be complex to implement, but they do provide really strong functionality for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, that's interesting. So actually, I know a lot of people in the audience have already scanned the QR code top left side of your screen. You can see the top 10 ranking for 2024 by scanning that code. But what else? So you talked about IFS you think is understated in our top 10 list. Clearly, you think Odoo should be number one on our list, right?
Well, of
Is that
course,
what you're
because the list is in order. So I think that they in opposite order. So number one, of course, I would put Odoo in that first spot right there.
right?
I just teasing.
What other changes would you make though? Like what other things jump out at you? Like if this is
Yeah,
just the Adam Cheatham top 10 list, what would you change?
yeah.
Like what are the things that jump out at you?
I think honestly, I think NetSuite's underrated on this list. I think they belong in the top five.
Mm,
And I think Fusion, it does not. To be fair,
yeah.
NetSuite is. I think that they, with SAP coming into the market, they're facing increased competition, which makes them feel like they're not as strong. But they're a top competitor, and they've got a target on their backs, which makes it hard to see that they deserve it. They've earned that target on their backs, in my opinion. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
So I'd say that they're underrated, and IFS is underrated. I really like the IFS platform, and that when you get it right, their implementation teams are very good,
Mm,
and that's really a key to the piece of the puzzle. You don't have to just select the right software; you have to implement it well. So I think that those two are underrated. I personally, I don't like Workday in the top five because I don't think it's a comprehensive ERP. You won't use it to run a shop floor. And for me, I'd maybe take a more traditional definition of ERP
mm,
for sure. And then as we're coming here, honorable mentions in the small medium business space, I'd love to toss in the Rise and the Grow platforms as an honorable mention. They're saying the right things. You can't put them on a top 10 list because we haven't seen them execute it. They've really only been in existence in this calendar year. I think that those are some key components that would be in there. I like where we've got Dynamics. I like Infor and Epicor in the top five. So I think that those are the things that stand out the most to me. And I would say that I do like Odoo as a step above the Force platform because
yeah.
the Force platform it doesn't feel as integrated to me as it ought to. So it's that there's just not as much of a breadth of functionality. Again, the shop floor, right? And from a traditional ERP perspective, is anybody using the Force platform to run the shop floor? I haven't heard of it. I've heard them try to use Rootstock.
I was just going to say,
And with mixed results. So
yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Those are great additions. I'd be curious to hear from the audience too what you would change or add to the mix here in the top 10 list as you see it. And again, you can scan that QR code top left side of your screen if you want to see the top 10 list. So I guess just to kind of close it all out and sort of wrap up the conversation, Adam, what are some of you think about software vendors to watch in 2024? What are those? Are there certain ones that are up and coming or big guys that are going to make a move that you think are going to make more of a footprint? What are your thoughts?
I would say that I think that Infor is going to continue to make a move in the space in 2024. I think that's undeniable. They're really starting to settle into a really a position of strength. I would see. I wouldn't be surprised by a drop in popularity on the Dynamics platform, similar to what we saw with NetSuite this last year, because that's certainly something that I would if I were a betting man, I would say that Dynamics drops out of the top five just by sheer will of the folks that try to implement it and getting tired of it. Same with NetSuite, right? And now it'll have a target. I think that you'll continue to see SAP be a struggle for some, and I think that you'll you'll see Fusion get better, and compete more head to head. I think we'll see more of that. So that's what I think we see more of. The SAP platform for Rise and Grow, I think is something to watch. Um, I would normally hesitate to say new ERP systems aren't going to make a difference for after a year in, but you can build a client base really fast when you're implementing software between 4 and 13 weeks. So really the idea there is if it building a critical mass from a client base perspective is what will I think we'll see that happen quickly with those two platforms. So those are my thoughts. I'm curious for you, what type of trends are you seeing, less as it pertains to the top 10 and more as it pertains to the collective investments that they'll make into growing into different spaces? Are there industry trends that you're seeing that will become bigger over the next couple of years, whether it's interoperability or AI or something like that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that interoperability thing is worth noting. And actually, Kyler had a question on that too on LinkedIn. She said, "What about interoperability solutions like Snowflake and Palantir technologies?" I think I think we'll probably see more and more of that too. We talked about the platform movement. We've talked about the low code movement. Obviously, we've talked about AI. Another one is interoperability. And I think the reason for that is because so many organizations are so far behind in their technical debt that a lot of these companies are still going from old mainframes. They're still trying to figure out how to get off an old AS400 or I-series mainframe based systems. It's not a lot, it's not a majority of the market, but there's a lot of them out there, more than you might think, that are still we're talking about cloud over here and AI and all this stuff. They're still stuck on a green screen mainframe system. So you got all these companies that aren't going to make that shift overnight. They're not going to overnight jump from mainframe or really old on-prem system to cloud AI driven solution. That's a huge jump for most organizations. So I think the interoperability movement gives you sort of an interim solution, a way to leverage the technology you have, get more value out of it, get a single source of truth, get better analytics, and get some benefit and more value while you start to transition more of those back office systems to the cloud. So I think that interoperability movement will continue to pick up steam, and that's why Snowflake and Palantir have continued to thrive. I also think there's something going on in the market right now, sort of late in the year, and I don't know if it'll continue into 2024 because I'm not an economist, but there seems to be something with larger enterprises where they seem to be a little bit more cautious right now than they were 6, 9, 12 months ago. I feel like ever since COVID, it's just been go, invest in a bunch of new technologies because we have to. We're outdated. The work from home thing put a lot of pressure on our systems. We've got to do these digital transformations. But lately, in the last 3 or 6 months, it feels like companies are sort of backing up a little bit, catching their breath and saying, wait, hold on, let's be a little bit more selective about how we invest in technology. And I don't know if that's the economy getting weak. I don't know if that's change fatigue. Organizations are just tired of going through all these changes. I don't know. But I think that all those trends point to interoperability potentially being, stronger in 2024.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time, Adam, and audience. Thank you. These are awesome questions. There's a million we didn't get to, a lot of really good questions. So thank you for all your engagement and participation. Again, if you haven't checked it out, scan the QR code, top left side of your screen. You can see the top 10 list. Feel free to drop comments in the chat. I'll keep watching the chat even after we're done being live here. Would love to hear your feedback on all these different vendors. And this podcast will get repackaged and edited and added to new content to be part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released a week from tomorrow. So Wednesday of next week. You can find new episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So be sure to check it out if you haven't already. And I want to thank you all for your time. So thank you very much. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm going to go recover from the Odoo questions.
Right, exactly. Now you've been triggered for the last hour, you can go get some water. So
yes, indeed. Thank you again. All thanks for having me. I love these conversations, so they're a ton of fun.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Adam. Really appreciate it. We'll chat with you guys soon. Take care.